It looks like we're on the East Coast getting into the end of a very, very wintry beginning of spring. We'll see what happens, but sun is forecast in our area. I hope it is in yours, and it'll be a pleasant time. They're still coming up with theories about that Malaysian jet. And some think that the thing may have been stolen and landed and will be used in the future as a terrorist weapon.
How could that? Well, we'll find out. And today, Malaysian officials say they're investigating the fact that files were recently deleted from that flight simulator found at the pilot's home. Charlene Aaron has the story.
Investigators are zeroing in on an area the size of Texas in the South Indian Ocean, where satellite data suggests the plane could have gone.
You're on your way to Antarctica at that point. The good news here is that we have the Australians with the NTSB now in charge of this investigation.
And new clues today. Thailand's military reports that its radar detected a plane that may have been Flight 370 just minutes after the jetliner's communications went down. Thai officials say they didn't share the information earlier because no one asked for it. Meanwhile, the search for answers is ongoing. If the plane was in trouble, officials say it didn't send any signal.
There were a number of distress beacons on board the aircraft, and we know that they have not been activated because we are the receiving authority for such alert.
The investigation into why Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 vanished has taken another strange turn. Investigators can't rule out catastrophic system failure, but say all signs point to a deliberate act. Theories abound as to the fate of the 777 jetliner and its passengers, including some pilots speculating on the internet. One suggests an electrical fire erupted in the cockpit and that the aircraft's abrupt turn westward is a clue that the pilot was trying to land at the nearest airport. Another pilot with 25 years' experience says all facts point to a terrorist hijacking. He says the plane could be on the ground somewhere, being loaded with bombs or even chemical weapons to carry out a future attack. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, thanks, Shirley. I think the time has come to stop speculating and just say, well, it's whatever happened is too bad. And it's one of those unexplained mysteries, so I'm sure that it'll go down in the annals as something that they write mystery stories about. But until some fictional writer comes out, we don't know what the answer is, so I mean, why bother?
Pat, how could you hide 200-some people?
That's what you don't know. I mean, are the hijackers going to kill the people? I mean, if it crashed, they'd kill them. But you ask yourself, what is going on? I mean,
and they've got cell phones.
If they went to the Maldives, you know, there's some thought there was a landing script there, but who knows? I mean, it's just, it is a mystery, and the people, but just think of what goes on in the minds of those folks. I mean, they're cut off from their families and their friends and their lives. It's a terrible thing. Well, anyhow, it's what's also terrible is that mess in the Crimea, and we have a feckless president who just doesn't seem to know what he's doing, and Putin has taken advantage of him and actually laughing at him. Well, tensions are rising higher now in the Crimean Peninsula after the Russian president claimed control of the territory on Monday. John Jessup has that story from Washington. Here's John.
Pat, pro-Russian forces seized the headquarters of the Ukrainian Navy today and hoisted the Russian flag over the building. It's just the latest flashpoint in the growing crisis between Russia and Ukraine. George Thomas reports.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin's bold military moves have left much of the world reeling and on edge.
The crisis in Ukraine is the most serious test of European security in the 21st century so far.
Nearly 3 weeks after marching his troops across the Black Sea Peninsula, a proud Putin declared to thousands of cheering Muscovites in Red Square that Crimea was finally back on the Russian map.
У нас сегодня очень радостный, светлый праздничный день.
In neighboring Ukraine, unease and despair are setting in as the political crisis takes its toll. Months after tens of thousands of Ukrainians took to the streets of Kiev, there is still an air of uncertainty that lingers over this nation.
Business is worsening.
And a weak government here can only watch as Russia continues to deploy more troops along its border. This morning, armed gunmen stormed the Ukrainian naval base in Crimea, raising the Russian flag. It came a day after an Ukrainian officer was killed by Russian forces. The Baptist Christian who leads Ukraine's interim government says Putin's actions are a threat to the world.
I would like to remind you of the history. World War II started with the annexation of the territory of other countries by fascist Germany. Today, the president of Russia, Mr. Putin, who likes to talk about fascism a lot, is copying the fascists of the last century.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry warned Putin that he was, quote, on the wrong side of history, while Vice President Joe Biden, traveling in Poland, said America will consider sending additional troops to the region to reassure Eastern European allies,
including rotating U.S. forces to the Baltic region to conduct ground and naval exercise, as well as training missions.
But will this and increased U.S. and European sanctions be enough to stop an advancing Putin? Probably not. For now, leaders in Kiev and Western capitals can only watch and worry about how far Mr. Putin will go. George Thomas, CBN News.
And congressional Republicans are urging President Obama for tougher actions against Putin in Moscow. Critics say, Pat, the president's response to the Ukrainian crisis has been weak.
Doesn't take critics to say that. Any careful observer would say it's been weak. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, you know, Santayana said that those who would not learn the lessons of history are doomed to live them again. And I think there was a lesson in history. All right, there was the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. And the treaty said that the Germans could not build up forces in Alsace-Lorraine. That was the treaty. Okay. Comes the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler is beginning to flex his muscles. He has a weak army, a weak country, and France and Britain have big armies and are strong. But Hitler says, I'm going to pull a bluff, and I'm going to just ease my forces into Alsace-Lorraine. I'm going to build it up, and I'll see what they do. If they had said don't, he'd have said, okay, I'll pull them back, and that'll be the end of it. But instead of that, the British and French did nothing. They had the power. And then Hitler says, well, under that, I'm going to start building up my forces. And so he began to strengthen his army and build up the tanks and the airplanes and so forth. Okay, the next test came in Czechoslovakia, the so-called Sudetenland. And Hitler says the Sudeten-Deutsch are Germans, and they are being oppressed by these Czechs, and I, as their savior, have got to come in and do something about it. So he begins to make a move to annex that Sudeten territory. So Neville Chamberlain, weak leader of Great Britain, goes to Munich, and Hitler makes fun of him and takes advantage of him, and Chamberlain gives Hitler whatever he wants, and he says, okay, well, we'll let you have, you're in Alsace, we're not even going to talk about that, but you can have Sudetenland, and we will agree to force the Czechs to disband their army. It was the most powerful army in Europe. We're going to make them disband, and the next thing you know, Hitler has then got Czechoslovakia. Now he says, well, I've got a free reign. And he goes into Poland, at which time, finally, the Brits say, that's the end of it, we're going to war. Next thing you know, you've got World War II, and you have 50 million dead people and a Holocaust. In the United States, the life and the treasure has been beyond calculation. It all could have been stopped if a couple of those Allied leaders, France and Britain, had decided to be tough with Hitler when he was weak. Putin is weak, he's pulling a bluff, and he's getting away with it. And now is the time. The United States ought to send an air wing or more into Ukraine. We ought to send in troops or forces into Poland. We should not just do a couple of bits of sanctions about a few of the leaders. They ought to put crippling sanctions on the Soviet Union right now. And the best answer to it would be to take the cap off the exports of United States oil and natural gas and let Europe have an alternative to Gazprom. Right now, they're held captive by the Russians. And the Russians have the natural gas, and if they turn the taps off, then of course they go into cold and the lights turn off. And they don't want that. So they're afraid of tough sanctions. But it's time that we get serious, and we have a president that nobody believes is serious, and he doesn't know what to do. And you hear Biden over there, and he sounds weak too. What are we going to do? If there's a strong response right now, the last thing we want to do is go to war, because the Russians have an arsenal of nuclear bombs, and the idea is just beyond thinking. But right now, if we move our troops into Ukraine, if we give Ukraine the money it needs to stabilize itself, if we open the NATO to Ukraine, if we open we take Russia out of the G8 and say, you're not capable, you're no longer a member, it's now the G7. We can do all that. And the cost to Putin will be too high for him to continue. But if we let it continue, it's going to be awful, and the thought of a World War III is beyond comprehension. John?
Pat, speaking of cost, the cost of health insurance premiums are rising because of Obamacare, despite the president's promises that the new law would bring those costs down. The Hill newspaper reports the increases will be different across the country, with some places getting hit harder and others very little. And many of the nation's best cancer hospitals are now off limits to some of the people now signing up for coverage under the Affordable Care Act. The Associated Press made that discovery through a nationwide survey of comprehensive cancer centers with higher survival rates. Only 4 of 19 top cancer centers say patients have access through all the insurance companies in their state exchanges. That means many cancer patients may not be able to get the most advanced life-saving treatments. And cancer patients shopping online in the new Obamacare markets will have a tough time finding out if top hospitals are included in a plan. Even well-known insurance companies are scaling back cancer coverage under the exchanges. You can find out more about these stories on cbnnews.com. Pat?
Thank you very much. You know, I was listening, and the figures are in doubt right now, but they say 5 million uninsured people have signed up for Obamacare. That is questionable, because they know at least 20% haven't paid anything. And so maybe you've got 4 million, maybe it's 3, you're not quite sure. But these people have been willing to destroy the health system of the United States of America in order to insure 3 million uninsured people. I mean, it's just a disgrace what's happened. And of course, it's going to cost them the election, but it's like a terrible disease. It's fastened itself upon us, and it's going to be very hard to get rid of it. But the Republicans, if they stand together, will win the Senate and they'll win control of Congress, but they've still got a president, and he's got the veto pen. It's going to be tough the next couple of years. This country is in serious trouble. And but to think of destroying the great health care of the United States of America in order to insure 3, 4, 5 million uninsured people out of 300 million. I mean, it's just insane. Funny, it makes you upset.
I can tell you're upset. And, you know, I don't think we've seen the full ramifications of Obamacare. I think we're just seeing the beginning.
Well, they keep slipping every mandate. They slip this, slip, because they realize the political consequences of what they have put in place is just horrendous. And the Democrats are running for cover, and several of those in, you know, the swing states are going to go down, it looks like, in this coming election. And so, I mean, so you get the Senate and you get the House. You've still got the presidency, and it's not going to be easy to overcome. John?
Pat, most people don't have nearly enough saved up for retirement, and many have virtually nothing. That's according to the latest report by the Employee Benefits Research Institute. 36% of workers say they have less than $1,000, and 16% have less than $10,000. Although that number doesn't include traditional pension plans, since most people don't know what they're worth. Still, one money management executive tells USA Today the survey highlights the impending retirement crisis that we will face over the next 20 years. And he says the country needs more financial education. Pat?
There was a time that people worked. If they're on the farm, they worked. There was no such thing as retirement. They just kept on working. And when their hands got a little too stiff for milking the cows, they let the younger generation do it. But today, the idea of retiring at 65 and sitting around for 20, 25 years or so is just unbelievable. And so now you have advertisements. Here's how much money you need. Don't let your life exceed your money. But now $1,000. These people don't have anything for retirement. What are they going to do? Well, I tell you, the answer would be, instead of having a retirement age at 65, we ought to send it down to what the real age is, about 75 or 78. And it may shock some people, but 80 is the new 60. And
that's right. Look at you.
Amen. I mean, the idea of retirement is unreal. Who wants to sit on a cotton picking rocking chair and rust out? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
And how many people keel over after they retire for a year or two, and they get sick or they don't have anything to do, and now some people love it. Some people, my dad is loving being retired. He's traveling all over. He's been to the islands twice this year. He loves to golf and fish, and he's enjoying it. But
he must have had a good bit of money saved then, didn't he?
He did well.
He did
well. He did well.
Well, the average person, $1,000, that'll go in a week or so, a couple.
Oh, I know.
It's gone. I mean,
that's nothing.
Yeah.
That's gone. If your car breaks down, that's gone.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a tragedy when the baby boomers retire, but it's going to be an economic crisis of huge magnitude. We have got to deal with this thing, and people in Congress are too afraid. They need to tell the younger generation, here's the way the situation is, and for you and for the country and for your children and grandchildren, we've got to make a change, and we've got to ease up. Well, these retirement ages are just, they do not comport with the current actuarial tables. And we need to say 72, 73, 74, 75. That's the retirement age. And it's not 65 or 68 or whatever they've got in there. It's way too low. And they have to face it. But they don't want to face these problems. We have problems that could be solved if the Congress would get together, the Democrats and Republicans would work together as Americans and not as partisans. And don't you pray that would be the case, John?
Pat, women are far more likely to get Alzheimer's than men. Women over 65 have a 1 in 6 chance of getting the disease, compared to 1 in 11 for men. That's according to a new report from the Alzheimer's Association. And women face another major burden from the disease, as they're more likely to be caregivers for Alzheimer's patients than men. The cost of caring for people with Alzheimer's is expected to reach $214 billion this year. And Pat, the study also found that women are twice as likely to get Alzheimer's as they are to get breast cancer.
But the money goes for breast cancer research, and only a few $100 million is being spent on Alzheimer's research. They finally come up with the truth. Somebody dies and they say, okay, well, he had congestive heart failure. Actually, he's got Alzheimer's. Or he has pneumonia. He has Alzheimer's. And the Alzheimer's is the cause of the problem. But now they're talking about 500,000 dying a year.
Yeah, that's shocking. I didn't know that women had a bigger chance. But coconut oil.
That'll do it,
coconut
darling.
Oil. Got to start taking it now.
Stay with us. All right. But, I mean, seriously. There's several things. If they spent a little bit of money on Alzheimer's, if they spent some money on hardening the electrical grid, if they spent some money on cyber terror, and they stopped wasting it on these pet projects, the amount of money being wasted by our government is just appalling. Absolutely appalling, and it's all motivated by politics. Well, I've got this interest group, I've got that interest group, they're in my district voting, and I'm going to give them what they asked for. Oh,
Pat,
folks,
you ate your Wheaties today. You are fired up.
Well, I'm concerned about America. Okay.
A professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, is suing the school for violating his First Amendment rights. Dr. Mike Adams says since his conversion from atheism to Christianity, he's deliberately been overlooked for promotion. According to the Christian Post, Adams says from the time of his hiring in 1993, he was praised and promoted, but that stopped when he became a Christian in 2000. Adams says he was harassed and denied promotion even though he was more productive than his peers. His lawyer says universities are supposed to be a marketplace of ideas, not a place where professors face retaliation for having a different view than the university officials. Last year, a federal court found enough evidence supporting his claim to go to trial. Senator Ted Cruz says the Obama administration is more hostile to religious freedom than any other administration in history. Cruz gave the keynote address at Homeschool Iowa Lobbying Day. Addressing a crowd of more than 500 homeschoolers, he said there is no liberty more important than religious liberty and denounced the federal government's attacks on it. Cruz is considered a potential Republican presidential candidate in 2016. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.